Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next keynote. Tim Wu, as I'm sure you are all well aware, is the White House Special Advisor to the President on Technology and Competition Policy. You'll all be aware of his work when it comes to actually coining the term net neutrality and his work on net neutrality to the attention merchants. He's really done so much for our community already, and I'm particularly looking forward to hearing his keynote. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm really regret not being there. Just some things are it's a serious regret, particularly because I heard the weather is nice. I got to say, over here it's like 100 degrees. You can probably see we're sweating. Well, here's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to spend the next 15 minutes talking a little bit about what the White House and the Biden administration are up to. And then talk a little bit about this intersection between data and rhetoric, I guess I'd say. And I think that's a topic of interest to me, hopefully to you as well. Well, let me say a few things first about what we've been up to. As you know, competition, or as you may know, competition policy has been a big deal for the Biden administration. Sometimes referred to as the third pillar of the economic plan. We have, in this administration, formed a competition council, which is comprised of all the agencies that have authorities which are relevant to competition. So not just the two antitrust agencies, the FTC and Justice, but other agencies like Department of Transportation, Health and Human Services, the Defense Department, so forth. And we're coming up on the first anniversary of the executive order and the creation of the council, which we have, I guess, watch for it in July. We're going to have a series of new announcements, and I'm just putting people on notice of that. Let me say a few things about the sort of philosophy and the turn this administration has done. When he signed the executive order in last year, the president said two things that I think were important for setting the theme. He said, first of all, that we weren't really here to destroy capitalism, but to make it work for more people. Actually, the precise line was that capitalism without competition is exploitation. But I think that's the idea here. It's not been to undermine or destroy innovation or competition or any of these things, but frankly make them work the way they should and bring about the kind of widespread prosperity which has been possible at the best of times in this country. Second, and I think this was another big significant remark, the president said that we were turning the page on a 40-year experiment with minimal antitrust in the more of the Chicago style. You mentioned Robert Bork. You know, a school which often talked a good line on data and so forth, but frankly, in application was often indifferent to the kind of serious economics and data, which I know is a subject of this conference. So I think those phrases sort of set the tone. I think we've been moving in a direction. We've appointed officials who are serious about law enforcement. Not that others weren't, but you know, are very serious in seeing the laws enforced the way they were intended by Congress. Lena Khan, Jonathan Cantor being prime examples. And secondly, when it comes to the promotion of competition, as I said earlier, we've taken what's called a whole of government approach, which means all of the agencies are involved, and we are constantly putting pressure on the agencies to see what they can do to promote competition, lower barriers, promote a vision of the economy that is different than what we've had. And, you know, everyone knows that in some ways the best barrier to entry is a law or regulation. And I think that has been a significant part of our thinking, as has been the desire to fight the kind of things that make competition more difficult, like cloudy pricing or a lack of transparency. I think it's going well. Over the last few months, our antitrust agencies are on a winning streak. They've seen an enormous number of mergers challenged and abandoned, including a major semiconductor merger, defense industry merger, insurance brokers, sporting goods stores. There's been a lot of challenges. I think that the industry understands, or starting to understand, that the laws are being enforced, and I'm sure there's more to come. So some of the other things that they've been up to, we've had, I think this surprised some people, that the Department of Defense is signaling how concerned it is with consolidation of the defense industrial base in the United States. It's turning the corner, being more careful about procurement policies, and I think it's publicly reported, did not stand in the way of the Federal Trade Commission challenging a major merger. The Department of Agriculture is a big deal domestically, has been very concerned about, as have we in the White House, about meat packing, meat processing concentration, and they've been both seeding new competitors with a lot of money and grants, and also rewriting the rules under the special act called Packers and Stockyards Act. So those are some of the things we've been up to. I won't go on forever because I don't want to turn this into a huge laundry list, but that's the kind of stuff. And I think it cuts new ground for people interested in antitrust to have agencies doing rules as opposed to just the antitrust agencies bringing cases. Now, there's nothing wrong with cases. I love a good case as much as anyone else, but the rulemaking function is, I think, in some ways the next dimension. I'll add to that, there's been a big focus on labor antitrust in this administration, and the Department of Treasury here wrote a report, which I hope some of you've seen, about the role of labor. Among the conclusions was that lack of competition in labor markets has held wages down. We had a long period in the United States of nearly flat wages. And the argument is that lack of competition has held the wages down by approximately 20%. So that's another front. Let me turn to my next topic, or sort of the main topic that I want to discuss, which is the relationship between rhetoric and data, which I think is kind of an important thing. I wanted, sometimes the turn in antitrust has been linked to various figures in history: Thurman Arnold, Louis Brandeis. But I want to focus on Brandeis for a second, because I think there's certain things about the way he approached things that were commendable in terms of this question of rhetoric and data. Louis Brandeis realized, and I think it's important, that it is important that government speak to the people clearly and in ways that are understandable about what they're doing. This is often a challenge for those of us deep in the antitrust world. We get very deep into jargon very quickly. So I think it is, important that we remember in democracies that we are accountable to people. People need to understand why we're bringing the cases. If big isn't always bad, people have long been suspicious and concerned about monopoly power and their relative lack of options under it. So I think that's always important. But in some ways, what I want to talk about is the fact that while proponents of antitrust enforcement are often accused of soaring rhetoric, appeals to emotion and politics, I think it's important to remember that some of the, I'd say, opponents or those who have been against the antitrust project are themselves often in sort of more subtle ways guilty of relying on a few phrases or pat assumptions that have done a lot of, in my view, damage to what is an adequate level of antitrust enforcement. Let me take an example. It's very common in merger enforcement, or when a merger is proposed, that to claim that the merger will create new jobs. I remember, I won't mention specific mergers, but I can remember a merger in recent memory was claimed would create millions I think millions of jobs, in fact, was the claim. Obviously, or in practice, there's often very little data to back up that. Efficiencies in merger analysis, they may not quite be at the level of soaring rhetoric or populist appeal, but the claims of efficiencies sort of waved around often are, frankly, in the category, should be considered in the category especially when they don't pan out or really aren't seriously ones that the companies are merging for as being in this category. Chicago School, in my view, was fond of a theory of monopoly behavior that I think was its own way, a form of rhetoric. The monopolist in this view was a timid creature who was scared, constantly in a state of fear by the merest possibility of entry, would never consider raising prices above competitive levels because of that possibility. And, I don't know if that's populist rhetoric, but it's certainly rhetoric. It doesn't seem to match the observed conduct and incentives. In the remedies sphere, I think you saw this. I don't know how many times I've heard economists, even people who are very serious about data, rely on a phrase like, well, you can't unscramble the eggs. I would suggest that that's not a scientific statement. It may be that there are mergers or there are situations where a company has become so integrated that the costs of a breakup are not worth it overall. Although people have said that about many historic breakups, like the AT&T breakup here in the United States, and the stirring of the pot, the creation of new markets sometimes creates value that grossly overwhelms anything else that we do with antitrust. I just suggest those things are hard to estimate. We can't have a sort of a line like you can't unscramble the eggs doing serious work in this area. Finally, I think that we've also, in recent years, sometimes seen facts overcome by theory. I'll mention a specific case in the United States, the Amex or American Express case is an example where before the district court, the plaintiffs had done a good job of demonstrating harm, in fact, from the rules in that case, the steering or sometimes called gag rules in that case. They've done a good job putting on their case, but somehow the theory of two-sided market analysis trumped the evidence or the facts. And it's another example, while more subtle, that the opponents of enforcement use the devices and tricks of rhetoric to try to hand wave or skip what should be a serious, rigorous analysis. So, I'm going to leave it there with my collection of myths. I don't want to go on, but I want to say that, there is, I think there is a place, as I said, for government responsible to people to explain what it's doing in terms that are understandable. What I want to stress is the appropriate thing government does, and this might seem obvious to people, is to do that, but also make sure it has the data on its side as well, and the best economics we can, while not always speaking in that language. Turning this around slightly, I think we shouldn't assume that because you have someone who has a business background or is a highly talented economist, so they don't also rely on rhetoric or unsupportable phrases when the data runs out, and be on the guard for that, and realize that in some cases we have the data when we have it, and otherwise we're using judgment, and to pretend that can be solved by or that one side has some sort of obvious advantage when it comes to judgment. It just isn't something we can conclude. So that's what I wanted to say. And my bottom line is that everyone is going to use rhetoric and strong language, and we need to see it and use the data the best we can, as is the goal of this conference. So thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Tim. First question. So we've been talking quite a lot today about building in non-traditional skills into the ability to take forward antitrust and other competition cases. So we've been talking about technologists, which is sort of broadly would include data scientists, engineers, people working more qualitatively, could include behavioral scientists. So you've got a lot of experience of thinking about technology industry. Have you got any thoughts on what agencies sort of could or should be doing in terms of building in these new skill sets?
Yeah, no, that's I think that's been a long-standing desire of the U.S. agencies to have more people who are, particularly in the tech side, deeper. And I think it's obviously of great merit. And one of the things, just to get technical, is I really think it affects and should affect how people understand market definition and who's competing with whom. I think the challenge is when you bring in technologists but don't in some ways listen to them. And the question is who is competing with whom in a situation where you have a much more plastic technology that can evolve into something else, is one that I still think hasn't been fully reckoned with. And so I think that the challenge, everyone I think probably at this conference and otherwise says, well, it's really great to bring in other people. But in a sense, they have to be listened to. And their experience with how competition works and needs to be given credit. And I think we haven't fully made those steps, haven't fully understood things like what exclusionary conduct really looks like in tech industries, or what market different competition and substitutes look like. And always hoping that somehow we'll get the answers out of traditional microeconomic analysis. So that's what I think is the real challenge, is taking that next step beyond just hiring the people and saying that's nice and putting them in a room with a lot of computers.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go on a completely different tack now. So picking one of the questions, thank you very much for submitting them online. And I'm going to slightly adapt it. Do you think in some cases we should be mandating interoperability? Where do you think we should be mandating interoperability, and where do you think we should not be?
That's a very general question. Although I know there's a panel on the whole topic, so I'm nervous to opine on a topic. So my instinct is that some of the greatest gains that we have seen in frankly I guess you'd have to call industrial policy or economic policy have been from interoperability done at the right time and place. In a sense, you can understand a lot of the most successful telecom regulation, including the first interconnection rules, and some of the phone number sharing rules, phone opening rules. In telecom, I think you have a good series of examples where you've had interoperability be very successful. But it takes a very deft hand, because at the same time I can have an enormously long list of failed interoperability efforts, usually because they required way too much effort or expertise on the part of the user. There was this weird, I don't want to get too much into it, but the FCC has had a series of sort of doomed efforts to keep set-top box competition alive that usually involve a user having to request something, have it be sent, installed themselves, and so forth. So, once as an academic, I once gave a talk about, actually this was about unbundling, where I said you got to cut at the joints. And I think the same thing is true with interoperability, which is, I guess I'm not in favor of sort of general interoperability principles that you hope will work out. I'm much more in favor of trying to figure out a scenario where it's very realistic that with a minimum amount of user activity, you'll actually get new competition. Where somehow, and it's hard, it's fact specific, switching phone services and bringing your number along is a good example of something that people both want to do, and the competitor wants to have it happen too. So it happens quite easily, and everyone's incentivized to do it, and forcing the existing party. I realize it's more data portability than interoperability, but they are related. You need some interoperability. So I think that it takes this sort of accumulated wisdom, almost like a common law of interoperability, where you see the people. I think I would study all the cases of failed interoperability and successful before mandating it for any situation. That's my thinking.
Lovely, thanks, Tim. So we've got 1 minute left, so time for one more short question. So you talked a bit about explaining things to people and us being better as agencies at communicating, but are we doing enough to understand what people want?
That is a great question. I feel that in government, we are constantly, especially in the more technical sides of government, constantly in danger of sort of escaping from what people want and why they support government at all, and the kind of things they're looking for government to do for them. And it's challenging because the public doesn't usually, they don't come in with a sophisticated theory about two-sided market analysis, but they do care, I would say, very much. And you hear this about just how much of a sense of opportunity there is in the markets they are in, particularly if you're talking about a small business, how powerless they feel in the face of certain monopolists, and just how uncomfortable they feel with private, and now this gets political, with private power being in a few entities who are not accountable by voting or any other means. And I think it is incumbent on all of us to sort of translate those desires, which after all led to the enactment of the antitrust laws in the first place, and try to follow them and see if we can keep ourselves aligned with the democratic will. Because I think in the end, antitrust law, or all laws, frankly, live and die on their connection to the will of the people at some level. And I think we get into great peril by wandering too far away from what people want, however expressed.
Couldn't agree more on that. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Tim. We really appreciate you making the time, which you know is an incredibly busy time for you right now. And certainly speaking on behalf of myself, all the audience in the room here and online, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So I'll ask the panelists to come join us for the next panel. And it's my pleasure to introduce Diane Coyle. So they'll